The UK is very unique in the fact that we pay two forms of income tax, and it's not fair because they're basically national income is a tax on employers and work. So let's see how brave they want to be. This is a long overdue reform.
Well, I think for business, this was the best case scenario in the short to medium term, in that it was a coronation. It was done very quickly. We're probably going to get an earlier budget, which I think business will be delighted about.
My frustration last time was that we had a Prime Minister who was uniquely disinterested in the economy. This one is much more interested in the economy. It's yet to be sort of determined what exactly his vision of political economy is, but clearly it's going to be running out of the Prime Minister's office, so that's where accountability is going to lie.
Thanks for watching this episode of The Business. This show is sponsored by PwC, helping you meet tomorrow's tech demands so you can compete at a speed that rewrites the rules. Discover more at pwc.co.uk. Today we're going to be talking about the new Prime Minister, a new cabinet, and what it all means for business. To help us navigate through what have already been some shifting sands, we're joined again by Richard Fletcher, business editor of The Times, and Mehreen, The Times' economics editor. Welcome to you both.
Mehreen, if I could start with you. The big surprise, of course, earlier this week was the choice of Chancellor, John Healey. Am I right in thinking that everybody, including most of the newspapers, were absolutely convinced it was going to be Shabana Mahmood?
Yeah, they were. I mean, days leading up to it, there was a big news that somehow the Prime Minister had told the Home Secretary, convinced her because she was so unwilling to leave her post, that she would become the Chancellor. And then I guess like a lot of reporters, we started looking into what Shabana Mahmood type number 11 would look like. And it was all to no good because John Healey emerged. I think maybe around 12 hours before the announcement, there were some signs that it wasn't going to be Shabana Mahmood. The question was, who would it be? It is a surprise, but apparently it was going to be John Healey all along. I think, we can ask why. I think there's a sort of triangulation that was done. When I was here last, we were talking about Ed Miliband as Chancellor. We'd ruled out Shabana Mahmood. John Healey wasn't even in the picture. He'd someone that resigned from Keir Starmer's government over defence spending. But maybe the calculation was that Ed Miliband annoyed some people on the right of the party. Shabana Mahmood was annoying people on the left of the party. John Healey is probably on the right of the party, but because of perhaps the way that he presents himself, he as a, I would say a more patrician northern figure, maybe the optics are better for both left and right, and so you end up with this kind of triangulation and a figure that seems to be welcomed. Most of the feedback that I've got about people who worked with John Healey, he's incredibly serious, incredibly experienced, quite an avuncular figure within the cabinet and among members of the Labour Party, and so here we are.
And what does it mean for the kind of direction of the Treasury, do you think?
I think when I was here last, I said that there will be a lot of noise generated about the choice of Chancellor, but ultimately we're probably moving to a situation where economic policy is going to be driven by number 10 more so, as in by the Prime Minister. I think that's still the case, but even probably more so the case with someone like John Healey. He was the Treasury Minister under Gordon Brown when he was Chancellor, under Blair's government, but hasn't been around economic policy for a while. The thing that he has been very vocal on is defence spending. And so, it's difficult to say what John Healey's views on the economy are, but we know that he is a huge advocate for a bigger defence budget. And he does believe that the defence budget can be a solution to other problems like reindustrialising the economy. So Britain building its defence base as an industrial base with jobs attached to it as part of the re-levelling and rebalancing of the economy away from the South and services. So that's probably as much as we know that he will be vocal on. And he's also given, I think, reasonably boilerplate statements about the fiscal rules and the importance of fiscal credibility.
Richard, what has been the reaction from business people? And do you know, did they express to you any preference for Mahmood over Healey, for example, or vice versa?
Well, I think we saw an immediate reaction in the market in that defence stocks rallied after his announcement. Babcock International, they make warships and maintain many of our naval bases. They were up 4% on the day. Kinetic, one of our big defence companies, was up 3%. BAE Systems, 1.8%. So, I think the manufacturing and defence sectors are pleased with the appointment. Make UK praising Healey as a sort of pragmatic politician focused on delivery. So we saw some reaction there in the markets. I mean, I think, as we discussed the last time I was here, I think business was was very unhappy about the idea of Ed Miliband. So I think actually, as long as it wasn't Ed Miliband, there was going to be some relief. We've obviously seen, in terms of other market reaction, we've seen gilt yields tick a little bit higher since Burnham's since he officially became Prime Minister, partly on the back of some of his comments about flexible fiscal rules. But obviously we've also seen, a huge jump in the oil price over the last 10 days, and that, as we know, drives up gilt yields, because that suggests that we're going to have to raise interest rates to fight inflation.
As luck would have it, John Healey, the new Chancellor, actually made a speech this morning, just a couple of hours ago, and he used one word, begins with a P, listen out for it now, which I thought was actually quite significant. Let's hear what he had to say. He was speaking in the city this morning.
I want government decisions to raise the levels of investment, of innovation, of confidence, and of profit in British-based businesses.
That was John Healey speaking at a city conference this morning. The word, of course, was profit. And he used it in the sense of that it would be a good thing to maximise profit with British companies. Richard, I don't think I've heard a Chancellor, certainly not in the last couple of years, say something like that about maximising profit.
I don't think I've heard a politician say that since probably maybe Cameron or Osborne. I mean, that is a significant shift and a really interesting one. I think that's very encouraging that profit is no longer a dirty word as far as the Chancellor or politicians are concerned.
Because he actually did go on to talk about financial services. And again, I don't think a Chancellor has actually been in the city to try and talk up financial services. Well, I'm probably exaggerating. They probably have. But it is quite interesting that he chooses to make one of his first interventions in the city in a not in front of a aero engine factory in the Midlands.
With a hard hat on and a Viz jacket.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, really interesting. And I think that'll be welcomed by financial services, which obviously still is our largest generator of GDP, as an industry.
Mehreen, we also had two sort of steers on tax policy from Andy Burnham. Before we get on to whether they're going to happen or not, because shifting sands and all that, he sort of advanced them and then took them away. One was on the personal allowance, the other on the additional rate tax band. Can you just explain what the two of them are and what the change might have been?
Yeah. So what Andy Burnham is getting at is that since 2021, the tax thresholds for this country, so the rates at which you pay 20%, 40%, and the additional rate have been fixed for near 5 years now. And it's been fixed at a time when inflation has been incredibly high. And that means more people are now paying much higher levels of tax, not because they're feeling richer, because inflation has not been adjusting for their earnings.
Or paying tax at all.
Or paying any tax at all,
yeah.
Exactly, which is where the personal allowance comes in. So just a very striking fact I think I wrote about this week is that in 2021, when Rishi Sunak decided to freeze the thresholds, around 4 million people in the UK were paying the top rate of tax, which is 40%. By the end of next year, it will be 7.5 million people. Right, so we've had the biggest stealth increase in tax that we've ever had in any modern post-war era. And that's not because any chancellors announced that they're going to increase tax. They've just decided that the thresholds don't change. And given that we have an unprecedented period of inflation, most people have been paying far more tax without ever feeling richer or getting a better pay rise, right?
Okay, so more people are being dragged into paying tax, because he was talking about the bottom limit, the £12,500. If you earn less than £12,500, you don't have to pay tax. Above 12.5, but he also talked about the additional rate of tax, moving that up to 50p in the pound.
Yeah, which is around 45% right now. So if we hadn't frozen the tax thresholds, the basic allowance, which is around 12,500, would have started about 16,000. Right, so that is a significant difference. If Andy Burnham wants to increase the personal allowance, say, by about £500, that would cut £100 off people's basic rate of income tax, so the lowest earners. Now, the question about what do you do with the additional rate, I think, is actually a more substantive one. But I don't think that they could announce an increase in the top rate without having a massive reform of the thresholds. So I think what we're hearing is these incremental noises about the top and the bottom. But actually, the reality is that people in the middle, nurses, teachers, are now paying what is the higher rate of tax, which is 40%. So this could be Andy Burnham opening the door to, I think, a very needed conversation about thresholds. This is something that Rachel Reeves never spoke about because it was the biggest cash earner for the Treasury, right? The government is making so much money out of the fact that they haven't changed the thresholds for a long time. So I would welcome it. I think the problem is that when you say it in a piecemeal way, you're basically saying, well, we're going to help the bottom and tax the top.
Because you should just say, it looks like it's not going to happen.
Well, actually,
having talked about it.
if you want to open this Pandora's box, I would say that the idea, like, you don't have a lot of time, right? So they don't have a lot of time before an autumn budget. If you were going to introduce a rejigging and a resetting of the thresholds and a changing of top or bottom rates, that you would need more time. So I think what I'm worried about is that these trial balloons are being headed out. You'll see more before Labour conference in September. And actually, when it comes to budget time, there'll be an under-delivery because they'll have to do an assessment. They'll have to, put it out to the private sector and they'll have to work out how much money they raise or lose by various rejiggings of thresholds and basic allowances and top rates.
I think one of the interesting things was he said that this has been raised on the doorstep during the by-election. And we used to think of this as a stealth tax. We used to write about it as a stealth tax. But as Mehreen says, it's now the biggest raiser of revenue. It's the only way Rachel managed to balance the books because because of the way it works. It raises more and more money every year. So I do think it's interesting it's now entered the debate and people are really thinking about it. I mean, I think it was George Osborne was the last Chancellor to sort of raise the personal allowance, wasn't he? Which we sort of all considered at the time quite a brave thing to do. Obviously a great thing economically in terms of fewer people paying tax at the bottom, but it was considered quite brave because it's not a great headline grabber, although it does make a large number of people better off. I think that's fair, isn't it?
I mean, there is a bizarre irony that the Tories created a far more progressive tax system, as in they took lower earners out of the tax system and they taxed higher earners more, which is something that neither the Tories wanted to celebrate and Labour didn't want to point out. So there's kind of been a conspiracy of silence about the changes in the tax system. And actually the bigger question is that we have built a tax system with so many exemptions, cliff edges, that you have people, just above the £100,000 a year rate, which is not higher earners, actually. It's now middle class people who pay marginal rates of 62%. So I think there should be a recognition that the tax system has become too complicated. The thresholds have created a lot of iniquities, but this stuff will take time. If I was the Chancellor, which I'm not, I would promise to do something like this for the next Parliament. Say, give us time to make sure that we get a more equitable tax system, which is progressive, and make sure everyone pays enough. But we can't do it yesterday.
Because just one final point on the thresholds, as things stand, they're frozen until 2031, which is an awful long time.
Which were extended constantly by the Chancellor. So one of the ways that she managed to get the OBR to tell her that she was meeting her fiscal rules is by having a complete silence on the issue of the thresholds, by not saying that, but basically continue them in perpetuity by extending them every year.
But if you were the Chancellor and you were saying we'll do that in the next Parliament, would you include in that abolishing national insurance and just having a basic income tax?
I did write my column this week about it's time for a massive rejigging of the tax system because of these huge inefficiencies. National insurance is just another way of paying income tax. It's difficult for people to understand why they pay it. This is why Boris Johnson wanted to call it the sort of the solidarity health and social tax. So we knew that it was money for the NHS. That was all put in the bin. But I think that was an introduction of some kind of clarity. The UK is very unique in the fact that we pay two forms of income tax, and it's not fair because they basically national income is a tax on employers and work. We don't tax rent in the same way, don't tax capital gains in the same way that we do. So let's see how brave they want to be. You could argue that maybe someone like John Healey, who's ideologically, there's some ambiguity around him, can actually do some of this more difficult stuff than, say, someone on the left or the right, because they have constituencies that they need to please. I think this is a long overdue reform. And I think the reason that you need to do it is because if you're serious about tax reform, if your opposition is, say, reform, they haven't done so much serious thinking about the tax system apart from taking huge amounts of people out, which is younger people, and basically abolishing the bottom rate. And so you create a big fiscal credibility issue on your opposition if you have, I think, a much more thought out tax plan. So there's various ways you could do it. When you speak to politicians, they all say this is suicide, we can't talk about tax. But at some point, I think this nettle has to be grasped. And it probably should be Andy Burnham, given the mandate he's come in on and the relatively oppositionless space that he exists in, because the Tories are kind of nowhere and Reform are having a lot of psychodrama with a bin for the next couple of weeks. So yeah, maybe this is the time.
So assuming we're not going to see whole-scale reinvention of the tax system
not yet
in time for the budget, presumably in October, or at least later this year, what is the main thing that Healey does have to do in the budget? What do you think, Richard?
Well, he's going to have to balance keeping the markets happy and his backbenchers happy, and I wish him the best of luck with that. And as we move closer to the next election, I suspect his backbenchers are going to become more and more rebellious. So yeah, he's got a very difficult path to tread. And as I'm sure Mehreen will shortly lay out, he's also got, lots of money to fund the increased defence spending, and he's going to be facing, it looks like an inflationary environment with, energy prices rising, as there seems to be no end in sight to the Middle Eastern conflict.
I think in the short run, we already know what the immediate priorities is, and it's around the cost of living. So the cut on VAT on energy bills to try and bring down disinflation. In the short run, I think this government has already clocked on, and we saw it at the end with Rachel Reeves, that the easiest way to get breathing room is to move towards or encourage a lower interest rate environment. It takes the market pressure off. It means people who are going to have to remortgage for the first time since 2021. If you took a mortgage out for 5-year mortgage in 2021, 2026 is the year that you're actually going to feel the hit. And that would have been a lot of people, because a lot of people bought houses during the pandemic. And so I think the singular focus on every policy measure needs to be something that brings down CPI, can help the Bank of England provide you with the biggest sort of easy money hit. And we've been in a world where fiscal policy and monetary policy haven't been working in tandem. They've both been too tight, arguably. And now I think the Bank of England would like this government to give it the room to cut interest rates. And I think that should actually be the biggest short-term injection of confidence into the labour market and people's pockets that you'll see in 2027, rather than anything big like, planning reforms and very good things about deindustrialisation, which will not reveal themselves, for decades potentially for the economy. So I think cost of living has to be the priority.
Let's get back to the budget. So everybody's talking about sticking to the fiscal rules, these things that Rachel Reeves brought in. Her fiscal headroom on the 5-year forecast was £24 billion. But lots of people have done the sums and worked out, well, actually, this has moved and that has moved.
Yeah.
Where do we think we are now on that £24 billion? About half of it's gone, something like that?
I think half of it's gone. And almost as soon as we had a spring statement, half of it had gone, because the Iran war had basically wiped out about 10 to 12 billion. And this is purely an arithmetic function of how market interest rates work. So this is why I described the gilt yield, and where monetary policy sits is the thing that can rob a chancellor of, the equivalent of a 1p cut in the basic rate of income tax or national insurance, which is £5 to £6 billion at a splash. Rachel Reeves did increase her buffer. So we went from about 10 to around 22. The fact that we've gone back to 10 again will put us back in a limited room. And I imagine John Healey will do what previous chancellors did, which is just to basically massage the numbers as much as possible to make that buffer slightly higher. And the way the government's doing that is promising pretty deep austerity by the end of the parliament. So we've done a lot of front loading of spending and borrowing. And by the end of the parliament, this all goes down. Just a kind of really striking figure. The government budget deficit is about 5 to 6%. It's one of the highest in the G20 right now. The UK is going to run the tightest fiscal policy of any major economy in the world. That budget deficit is going to be down to something like 1% by 2030. If this happens, it would be the biggest form of fiscal consolidation that this country's ever gone through on paper, beyond the Thatcher years. So this is what is being promised. And the question is always, well, politicians promise this. It's always very difficult to deliver this because it's super painful. So there are going to be huge questions about what can be delivered upon with a new government, where the horizon is 2 to 3 years before we get a next election. Can they afford to pencil in a lot of austerity in the election year? So, yeah.
And talking of promises made by politicians, right, the other thing that they always promise is growth. And Starmer and Reeves talked a really good game on growth and never ultimately really got much going. Although actually there were obviously some figures out earlier this week which showed that things weren't perhaps as bad as we might have feared. Do we have any higher hopes for Healey, Burnham in terms of growth? What do you think, Richard, the businesses that you're speaking to?
Well, there's been obviously lots of talk, and I do suspect we'll get a little bounce in consumer confidence, and hence growth just from a new face in number 10. How long that lasts?
Vibes.
Who knows? Yep, vibes would have been better if we'd got slightly further in the World Cup. So I think there will be. And, he is promising, a different type of government. And, it's very encouraging to hear that profit word. So maybe they can deliver a bit more growth, but I think that's going to take some quite serious reforms to do that. And I'm not sure they've got the backbenchers particularly have got the guts to do that.
I think the lever that they pulled, which we haven't mentioned, is of course governance reform, which is devolution, which is a mass program of decentralization, which is what we spoke about, I think, when we were here last, Manchesterism. It's a growth strategy, it's a governance reform, it's a culture change, it's doing a lot of work, right? The idea that you decentralize a very centralized economy like the UK by allowing regions to flourish, find what they're good at, make them competitive at it, allow, hubs to build. That is a strategy, and it is a growth strategy, but again, it also probably will reveal itself over time. I think what's really interesting is that John Healey's first sort of real public announcement was in the city with financial services, talking about profit potentially as a way to reassure some nervous Southerners who work in consultancy, banking, and industries like that there's not just going to be a singular focus on the kind of mythical northern growth to get us out of our hole. So I think that's interesting. And I think the big question is, when I speak to people around this government, is there is a slightly binary attitude that the North needs to be good at something. The South is good at services, bio, fintech, etc. But the North needs to be good at something, and that something has to be manufacturing. We've fallen into this bizarre kind of psychological hole that people in the North have to make stuff because services won't be enough to satisfy like their northern souls. I would argue that we need to double down on the stuff that we're very good at. And if we're very good at services as an economy, it's the stuff that we make money from and we export. We should be good at it in the North and the South.
Nervous Southerners. Let's just talk about very briefly, Richard, about one particular thing that does confront anybody, one particular issue, which is Thames Water, the UK's biggest water and sewage company. It's running out of money. He talks about more public control, but the way is not entirely smooth, is it? There could be a trap waiting for Andy Burnham here. No,
absolutely. So obviously Thames Water were negotiating with Ofwat and the government under the previous administration. And, maybe this is just a great negotiation tactic to get a little bit more out of the distressed debt traders and the hedge funds that, now control the debt. And maybe they will avoid taking it back into government control. We'll have to wait and see. But he's been very strong. His rhetoric on this, not just in recent weeks, but, in recent years, has been very strong on this. So if I was one of those debt traders or hedge funds, I think I'd be slightly nervous. But, as our colleague Alistair Osborne was writing, this is not simple. And I think you and him were chewing the cud on rail track, both having covered that quite extensively. That was very costly and very painful for the government in the medium and long term.
So another big change in the first days of the Burnham administration is the scrapping of the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. Hannah, you've had actually quite a lot to do with this reporting on tech companies and tech startups in particular, and you've been talking to some of them over the past few days. What do they make of this reorganisation? So basically what was a separate Department for Science and Technology has now been folded into the Department for Business. Are they happy about this?
They're not very happy about this. And I think what they say is it's about the kind of environment it creates. It's about the vibes. If you're taking away this dedicated department for science, innovation, technology, what kind of message are you sending out about how important this is to the UK economy? I've spoken to lots of entrepreneurs and kind of lobby groups around this in the last few days. I think it's important to note that yesterday, Jonathan Reynolds was out
He's the new business supremo, back in his old job.
Exactly. But he's very well liked and respected. And alongside him was Kanishka Narayan, who's the AI minister. And what they were saying is that actually now there's two of them in the cabinet, and that's a really significant change, right? So rather than just having the business secretary, you've now got Kanishka alongside him. And what they were also keen to say is that this is genuinely a new department. So it's not just DBT, the Department for Business and Trade, with kind of the innovation and technology stuff bolted on the side. They're saying they're, reimagining it. They want to be able to go faster, like these tech companies are used to going internally within their organizations. And the other thing that they were really keen to point out is that by having trade and tech in the same department, that could actually be really helpful, because it will help these companies to roll out and potentially deploy around the world much more quickly. So I think time will tell whether that allies the concerns of the kind of tech founders I'm speaking to.
They were definitely out there trying to
But they were out there,
pour oil on troubled waters.
Exactly. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes down the next few days. The other thing, I've been speaking to a couple of CEOs this morning about the business rates change. that was announced today as well. So a 20% cut for pubs, clubs, and late night music venues. And they were just like, well, 20%. And I think you pointed out on Times Radio this morning, that doesn't actually amount to a lot of money. And hoteliers, they've been talking recently, haven't they, about the fact that they really need a business rate cut. And obviously they're not included in these changes. And also restaurants as well. The guy I spoke to this morning runs a very big restaurant chain. And he was just like, again, there's no help for restaurants. So across the board, lots of unhappy people.
No, exactly. I'm not going to ask Richard what he thinks about rates for pubs, because he has a very swinging attitude to that.
Could I come on AI just quickly, because I spoke to some folks around the government. So there is a logistical change, because now things like sovereign AI are going to be sitting with the Cabinet Office rather than sitting with the department. So there is, in some ways, the Cabinet Office is all of the civil service. So I think Jonathan Reynolds have made the argument that, well, AI is not just a department, it is going to revolutionize everything we do. So as close you can get to the Prime Minister, the better. I think Kanishka's promotion has been good. He's the first AI minister, I think, that will sit in a cabinet for a major economy. And it's important, I think, so what's the point of all of this? From what I've heard, the emphasis of the Burnham government is going to be about sovereign AI, which is about building and relying on British AI by creating a UK AI stack, because we have the companies and we need them to scale. So it's a kind of geopolitical security strategy as well, that we can't be reliant on American AI companies. China's flooding the world with free AI. Do we necessarily want to be customers of it or users of it? And so I think it's more than just obviously the private sector is worried, but this government does seem to have at least taken a view that we have companies that need to grow and develop, and the British government is going to be the first customers of these companies as part of this broader revolution about how AI can change.
That procurement point is a really important one too. Yes, Richard.
But I mean, all this talk about AI, we shouldn't forget that Lord Valence was loved by the life sciences industry, and
this is Patrick Vallance, best known for popping up on TV screens during COVID. Now became a science minister.
Yeah, he was the science minister, and obviously with the abolition of DCIT, okay, AI may have a voice in the room, but life sciences, which, alongside financial services, is one of those things we are really, really good at, and was one of the government's priority sectors. That voice has gone, as has Valence. So I agree, business very happy to see the return of Jonathan Reynolds, but I think our big drug companies and our big biotech companies, are sad to see Valence and that department go.
And it will also be interesting to see who Burnham and Healey surround themselves with in terms of advisors, right? Because I think one of the few strengths, perhaps, of Rachel Reeves' department was that she did have lots of advisors around her from the kind of worlds of entrepreneurship, people like Alex de Pledge, Matt Clifford, etc. So are there any indications yet who he's going to appoint as advisors, apart from Jim O'Neill and the others that we already know about?
Varun Chandra is staying. He was the Prime Minister's kind of investment czar. He will be staying.
Although he's mainly staying to be that link with the US, isn't he?
Yeah, so he's got a transatlantic.
He's got the US end. I mean, it's great news for business that he's still the business advisor, but he does also have this US envoy role,
which was created for him very recently and will not be.
And he's well respected amongst the business community.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it was a bit bumpy to start with. I think it's fair to say, but business definitely feels that he's a good voice in the room.
We know people like Jim O'Neill, Andy Haldane, Richard Hughes, the former member of the OBR, were around the Prime Minister's team. Previous Prime Ministers, not Keir Starmer, have had a sort of wise men and women's collection of economists that they come in and talk to them now and then. That might be something that's revived under Andy Burnham. So for now, we don't yet know people. There's another Jim O'Neill from Bank of America who's at the Treasury, who's someone that was brought in from the world of the city and finance. He may be sticking around. Just to say that Torsten Bell, who's the pensions minister, is keeping his job. He's also sticking around. So there's been, I think, slightly more continuity around the sort of figures that are doing finance, markets, the city and economics.
We've seen James Timpson leave and Lord Richard Walker as well, right? And I must just say one other thing. So on the bus cap, the bus fare cap that we saw, so Andy Burnham capping fares at £2. I saw John Caldwell on LinkedIn, who did a kind of poll, and he's got, lots and lots of followers, many of them kind of business owners, and saying, does this make a difference to your business? Do you or any of your employees get the bus to work? Will this make a demonstrable impact at all? And 75% of them said absolutely not. So I just thought that was an interesting tip.
I mean, on Lord Walker, given that Andy Burnham has put the cost of living at the heart of his agenda, I think it's not surprising he departed ways with the previous cost of living czar, not least because he is the son of a billionaire.
Let's look into our crystal balls now. I think actually you can paint a pretty good case for Burnham being lucky and the economy doing fine, or Burnham being very unlucky and the wheels coming off the whole thing. I might try and cast you against type. Richard, could you be upbeat and portray the lucky General Burnham, how things might actually be okay?
So I think that, if we did see oil prices fall again, and we obviously did see oil prices fall quite sharply on the ceasefire. Obviously, they've since risen just as sharply as that ceasefire erodes. But if we did see a proper ceasefire in the Gulf and energy prices falling, we would then see interest rates starting to fall. And actually, at the start of the year before the Gulf War, there were some early green shoot signs, confidence appeared to be returning. There was a little bit of growth. And, the fact is, we are, by historical standards, sitting on huge amounts of savings. But we, after, COVID, 2 wars, we're perhaps not surprisingly sitting on our cash. If we all felt a bit better and a bit more upbeat and there was a bit more stability in the world, there's a good argument that we might start spending some of that money, which would obviously be good for the economy.
Mehreen, paint the wheels come off scenario. You don't have to believe it, just set out how it might happen.
Commit to the bit. Yeah. We're speaking at quite an interesting time where the Middle East situation is in flux. Oil prices are around $90 a barrel. If you said someone at the start of the year that we would have maybe 6 months of continuous on and off conflict and the closure of one of the world's biggest choke points, they would have been saying oil prices are at 150. Now, so I think the big question is that do you get to the point where there's a breakthrough point in the oil price, and we've been sitting around 90 to 100, and then it kind of goes parabolic and we end up in the 150 world very quickly, which is an energy shock, which is the terms of trade shock, more equivalent to what we saw in 2022 when gas prices just went completely haywire. We're also heading into the winter, which means that energy usage just obviously is mechanically going to go up. And these are forces that, Rachel Reeves, by the end of her tenure, was really keen to say, look, I've been buffeted around by external shocks that we as a country have been, as a small open economy, are very exposed to. Now, the argument you have to make was that we need to become more resilient. I think Andy Burnham's actually already decided through various energy cost of living measures that they need to build up resilience to be less import reliant on so many of the necessities that we need. But in a world where the oil prices does go parabolic, then kind of all bets are off. The story of the world economy in the UK so far has been remarkable resilience to an oil price shock because the prices haven't been as high, and actually people are just weaning themselves off oil, right? We are really accelerating our decoupling from fossil fuels. And countries like China.
Well, China is.
China has effectively
saved the world
out
yes.
by shifting to coal.
Well, they've basically opted out of the oil market.
Yeah.
Since the war began. And that's because their reserves of oil are far greater than any of us imagined. I've had estimates that they've got 12 months of emergency oil stocks. And they, as an act of benevolence, have decided that they are not going to become, they're basically a swing producer of oil. So that's one of the reasons that we haven't seen a parabolic
price. Factory
price.
For the world, keeping the world economy on a reasonably straight path is not just in your interest. It's in your interest as well as the world's interest.
China could have dipped its foot back into the oil markets. They're deciding not to. And the calculations within the CCP are difficult to understand. But I think that most of it should not look a gift horse in the mouth and be very grateful for what's happened. We just don't know what's going to happen next because it's not entirely transparent. If I was Donald Trump, I'd be on the blow to Xi Jinping telling him, please keep your foot out of the oil market for as long as possible. But then you also don't want that because the US is a huge exporter of oil.
To keep my positive hat on for a moment, you mentioned winter there. I mean, we obviously have had an El Nino effect, which has had lots of effects this summer on weather, but it is normally a warmer winter following an El Nino. So there is a chance we don't need quite as much gas in Europe this year.
With the caveat that stockpiles are historically low.
Absolutely.
So that's always where the calculation about how much we have in reserve, how much we've locked in at lower prices, or how much spot prices are going to dictate
and gas
what
prices
people pay.
have doubled in the last week.
Well, if we could stop talking about winter for just a second, because I'd like to enjoy the summer first. And speaking of optimism, so when we were last together, both of you were optimistic about a change in Prime Minister and said it would be a good thing for the country. Are you as optimistic now as we look ahead, Richard?
Well, I think for business, this was the best case scenario in the short to medium term, in that it was a coronation. It was done very quickly, probably a little bit too quickly for Andy Burnham and his team, but it was a quick, coronation. There wasn't a long battle of some. It also means we're probably going to get an earlier budget. So it looks like we're going to get a budget in October, doesn't it? Which I think business will be delighted about, particularly consumer-facing business, because it means we have less speculation about tax rises in the run-up to, Black Friday and Christmas. So I think those are the positives.
How about you, Mehreen?
I think, one of the good things that Andy Burnham can do is just look at all the mistakes that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves made and not do them. So one of them is constantly generating noise about tax system. The fact that they are announcing almost daily policy announcements that are focused on the issue of affordability is good. You need to get on the front foot on this issue. Ideal world is we get interest rate cuts by the end of the year. That's probably the best scenario. And we talked a lot about the oil prices. The job of the central bank is to sort of look through a lot of this stuff as temporary. And the bank hasn't done that because they've been worried that it's going to stick around. I think we're moving to a world where actually the oil price volatility is not reflective of the general economy. The economy is weak and can justify interest rate cuts. The labour market is weak. I think rebuilding that relationship is good. Someone like John Healey's, actually, for all the noise that I think either Shabana, Mahmood or Ed would have had, has been remarkably lack of attention. It's already striking that the Prime Minister is taking a front foot on measures over the Chancellor. So we're seeing more of Burnham saying buses, cuts on business rates, taking a front foot on the affordability issues than the Chancellor. And my frustration last time was that we had a Prime Minister who was uniquely disinterested in the economy. This one is much more interested in the economy. It's yet to be sort of determined what exactly his vision of political economy is, but clearly it's going to be running out of the Prime Minister's office, so that's where accountability is going to lie. So it's change, and I think probably a good corrective to the last couple of years.
That's quite an upbeat note on which to end, I think.
How optimistic are you, Dom?
I'd say I'm a sort of a 6 out of 10 kind of guy.
What's your baseline, though? If your baseline is 3, that's great. If it's 5, then,
Yeah, exactly. Listen, that is a good... Hopefully we won't have to have you back until we have a budget in October. We won't have a change of Prime Minister before then. But thank you very much, Richard Fletcher, Business Editor of The Times, and Mehreen Khan, Economics Editor of The Times.
And don't forget, if you're listening to us right now, you can also watch us on YouTube.
That's all for this week. See you again next week.
Goodbye.